Welcome to the Outer Realm with Michelle DeRoche and Amelia Pisano. Airing live on the United Public Radio Network, 105.3 FM in New Orleans.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Thursday night segment of the Outer Realm. Do not ask me what happened there. It just wasn't working with me. Anyway, we are broadcasting live right here in the United Public Radio Network, UFO Paranormal Radio Network, 105.3, 107.7 FM from New Orleans, and Roku TV. For those of you guys who do frequent Roku, find us there as well. We're fully sponsored by the amazing folks over at Folgers Coffee, who have been basically a part of our journey since the beginning. So thank you, Folgers. We appreciate you so very much. Also, very grateful for Dr. Snick, the sonic surgeon, aka Justin Snicker, for his contribution of his time, his voice, and his music for our intro and outro. He's an award-winning composer of Halloween horror, sci-fi, and dark wave electronic music, which can be found anywhere that good music can be found. So check him out. Also, big thank you to Steve McGinnis, the artist behind the artwork here at the Outer Realm. So thank you, Steve. Find him on, again, Instagram and Facebook. Tonight, we welcome for the very first time Heather L. Arnold. She's going to be discussing her continued research and new subtac, The Island of the Giants, The Lost Race of Giants of Aruba, Bonaire, and I'm going to see if I can say this properly, Curaçao.
Yeah, that's right, Curaçao.
You know how many times I have to sound that thing out today?
Yeah, when you see a little squiggly under the C, it's an S.
I know. I was sitting here thinking, oh my God, I feel like I'm learning some hooked on phonics.
Yeah. I don't think Spanish is hooked on phonics, though.
Just like, what? I know. It took me a few
That's
shots
funny,
at
though.
it. So
That is funny.
Anyway, guys, I see there's already people chiming in with questions. Please note that we have 7 different chat rooms that are like all come to the soundboard. So it's kind of like having 7 lanes coming down into one. It's not like we're ignoring anybody, but we just have to work in order on all the chat rooms. And we have to go with the pace of our guest as well. So I see some good questions coming in, and there are questions that actually I thought of as well. So it'll be nice to share them up. So Joseph, we will get to you. Big hello to you, Tamara and Mark. Hey, Mark, how's it going? We're just waiting for Heather to come in. So it should be interesting. Anyway, oh, look at that. Okay. Waiting. So how are you?
Well, I'm okay. How are you?
Oh, it's been a day. It's been a day. So leave it there. Yeah, it's been a day.
I'm in a nice, heavy sweater prepared for the insanity of tomorrow. Just saying. Tomorrow night, we're expecting a storm into Saturday because, you know, March comes in like a lion.
It does indeed. So, yeah, quite a bit of snow coming mixed with rain. So always like, I have no patience.
I'm needing the sun. I'm missing the sun. I'm missing everything about it. I'm really missing the vitamin D. I'm missing the heat. I'm missing the joy it gives you when you see it. I'm having issues with my sound. I keep adjusting it, and it keeps sending itself back up to the top volume.
I hear you. Perfect. So, which is good. And I see that Heather is in. We're going to bring her in. Okay, people, here we go. Can Heather take me to the crib? Let us get there first, Mark.
You're a ray of sunshine.
Yeah. Hi. Hello, everyone.
That's because she's in Aruba, where it's really nice.
Exactly.
Right now it's not snowing like it is
That's
here.
my kind of life, beach life. That's my life.
Heather,
yes,
how are you?
Beautiful. Great. How are you? Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's our pleasure. It's our pleasure. We've been looking forward to it. And it's, I mean, your first time on, which is really awesome as well. And we've already had questions chiming in. We're just explaining to everybody they're going to have to wait till we get there. So, again, what we'll do when questions come in, we'll put them up and Amelia will read them off because we have a huge audio audience as well. So we just like to be able to hear the questions so they understand what you're answering and so on. So you'll have to be a little patient with us there, but otherwise we're good to go. So I'd like to always start off with humble beginnings because, you know, one doesn't just fall into researching giants without something that draws you to it. So I'm going to let you take it from there and we'll keep up with you and jump in every now and then.
Great. Well, again, thank you for having me. I'm actually broadcasting from the place where it all started, which is the Caribbean island of Aruba. For those who are unaware, Aruba is 16 miles off the coast of South America. It actually hugs the coastline of Venezuela. Some days we can actually see Venezuela from Aruba. So there are 3 islands that are called the ABC Islands, and there's Aruba, and then there's Curaçao, and then Bonaire, in that order geographically, going towards the west. And all 3 of those islands were called the Islands of the Giants, and they were noted on maps as such. I came into this by moving to Aruba in 2005, and I started a tour company where my whole goal was to have historically accurate tours. And what I was finding through going and stealthily looking at other people's tours or just speaking with tour guides in general locally was that a lot of the history being communicated to the guests was just made up, something for tips. And it was a little bit frustrating, but it allowed me an ability to find something was going to be new about my tours, in that they were going to be historically accurate. And so I began to research the history of Aruba, and it was so difficult to find the history of Aruba. It was very challenging, very cloudy, and it kind of just simply started when the Europeans came here. And that's kind of when they started talking about the indigenous population who was already here, which were Arawak, which most likely were from the mainland, meaning South America. So I then thought, well, this is odd because, you know, Aruba had gold and has gold. I mean, a lot of Aruba's gold is still here. And its location is very prominent. It was where all the, all the action is, very close to Central America and South America. It just didn't make sense. And then I found out that the children in school were being taught that the islands were called the useless islands. And it immediately triggered something like it was some sort of diversion, because you're not going to call islands useless if they have gold. So
that's true. Yeah.
I saw that coming.
Ooh, you're liking?
Huge. She's frozen.
So then I began to do research online. I went to the archaeology museum. I got some books out. They have a great archaeology museum here in Aruba, by the way. And so I found one of the archaeologists from that museum speaking at a conference, and he was
you're really low too.
Yeah,
you're really low.
Wow.
And back.
Because I'm getting a lot of feedback.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, you just phased out. You were gone completely. And it was really low. The soundboard's okay, so I don't know, because we'll just see what happens.
Can you hear me?
How's my sound?
Oh, there you go. You're back. You're coming and going.
I had to lower it because when I speak and all three of us are on our mics, I'm getting tons of feedback. So I'm just going to mute myself while you speak so I don't.
Okay, yeah, and Heather just disappeared altogether. So. But you're good now, like you're not freezing or anything. You were for a minute. So, okay, so we were talking about the museums, amazing museums in Aruba. If we can pick up from there, that would be great. You're freezing, you're lagging a little bit.
You don't see me?
Yeah, we see you. You're freezing a little bit, but we can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. So when the archaeologists mentioned that there were no giants in Aruba, during a talk, can you hear me?
Yeah, you're freezing up every now and then, but we're so far so good.
Okay, good. So when he mentioned that there were no giants in Aruba, I immediately figured out that there were probably giants in Aruba, because he was going on and really adamant that there were no giants in Aruba. It was very strange. So I immediately began to research giants in Aruba. And what I stumbled upon were Vespucci's letters that he wrote after he had visited the New World, and the New World being South America and some of the Caribbean. It was after his first and second voyages. And the term, the Islands of the Giants, actually came from Vespucci and from his voyages there, where he actually interacted with the giants on Aruba. Some people say that perhaps Vespucci first landed in the island of Curaçao, but actually the first island he landed upon was Aruba. And so then it was through that research of his documents, his documented story, his actual interaction with the giants, what they look like, how he feared for his life, and thought he was going to die the day he met the giants. And then it led me to look at the archaeological reports and research the archaeological reports, which all of my research is based off of the archaeological reports coming from Aruba, Bonaire, and Curaçao. And I have not counted them. I actually have a large suitcase, because I'm still waiting for my stuff from the States, but a large suitcase filled with all of the peer-reviewed journal reports, field notes, other printed and published reports of the archaeological remains of these giants. And it was through that research that I put together the story of this ancient race of giants who inhabited all three islands approximately 5,000 years ago, but now with new updating dating technologies, we're finding that they're going back in some cases at least 7,000 years, but it could be even longer than that. And quite frankly, that's what I think, that it probably goes back even longer than that. And and that's how I began the journey of the Islands of the Giants.
Well, it's fascinating. I have to ask you what your take is on where do you think they come from. I'm only going there because, there's so much that comes with the whole paranormal ufology side of everything. Oh, they came from space. They, came in, and people go, oh, they're Nephilim. Like there's so much that, you're like, no, can we just talk academically for a second? So what is your take on where they came from, who they were?
It's so puzzling because you don't know. They simply appeared, apparently, in Aruba, Bonaire, and Curaçao. They were not from Aruba, Bonaire, and Curaçao were actually at one point one island. And through a series of mega tsunamis starting in 500 BC, the islands were split into three. And it appears that these archaic humans, as the archaeologists refer to them, or pre-Columbian humans, were not from anywhere else. We're not from South America. We're not from Central America. and appeared out of nowhere on these islands. Now, interestingly, the story goes, the local story goes, that there is a stone actually that I've been to. It's on Bonaire. It's called the Mother Stone, or the Navel of the World, which is interesting because there's a Navel of the World in Easter Island as well. And this is a large monolith of limestone. And in the center of the monolith is an indentation. And it appears such as a navel, as a belly button. And it is through this navel that the giants were said to have been born. And from the backside of this navel going through the stone and into the center of the earth is supposed to be where the mother, the creator, is. And from this mother, she birthed these giants through this hole, this belly button. And to this day, when you go and you visit Bonaire, it's quite interesting. If you get to this stone, it's really off the beaten path, and you'll see a lot of skeletal remains scattered around the stone. It appears to be a place, and it's known for being a place where animals go to die so that they can get back to source quicker. And so we saw many strange animals to this day. We took a picture. My daughter and I have a skull. We saw that still we can't figure out what the skull is of. It's very strange. And also one of the legends of that stone is that if you're suffering from any illness, or have any sort of dilemma in your life that needs clarification, you can crawl or climb actually up to the navel, and there's no way a human can go in there unless they're in the fetal position, which is quite interesting. And then hopefully then all your problems will be solved if you spend some time in that navel. So that's the story that's told of the birthing of the giants. Personally, I have asked an archaeologist here on the island who's still an archaeologist, and I asked him, where does he think they came from? And he told me he thinks they have roots in ancient Egypt. And he came to that conclusion based off of their physical characteristics, how they were light-skinned, how they have light hair, and they also have cranial deformation, and it's a natural skull elongation. So it's not done by head binding.
No, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's very strange. The elongation of the giants here in the Caribbean is similar to the cranial elongation that you'll see in some of the ancient Egyptian mummies, such as Tutankhamun, Akhenaten, etc. So that could be one way of them, their origin story, but it's totally puzzling. Although they have many characteristics similar to giants found globally, which I think
that's a big one.
Yeah, exactly. Sardinia. Giants remains and stories of giants have been found globally. I think the only place where we haven't heard any stories of giants is Antarctica, but
so far.
Exactly. So far. Exactly. Right. Correct.
It's interesting because there's still so much that has to do with giants, and let's say the mounds of North America, where a lot of people believe they could be partially the origins of the North American Native people, the indigenous people, because so many skeletal remains have been found in mounds that were indigenous mounds as well. And nobody seems to be able to figure out where some of these indigenous people actually come from. Do you think that your giants or giants in general would, as soon as I say procreate with women of natural being, the hole in the field of things is going to start coming out at me. I know it, but do you think that was a possibility, or are we just looking at apples and oranges here?
No, it's a similar, from my window, I can see one of the three of the most sacred cave sites on the island. They're caves that are inside of a huge monolith of limestone. And there are several caves, but three of them show signs of habitation. One was simply set aside for burials. And this is a very inaccessible cave site. It's so dangerous. I went in it a couple of months ago, about 2 months ago, for the second time. And I mean, literally, it's such a dangerous trek. So you can tell because of the placement of where this burial is. These were elite status individuals. This was a site that was never to be discovered by others or in any way violated by the general population, who was probably above being ruled by these giants, below rather being ruled by the giants. And the similarity between the mound burials and the burial that in this cave is that the one of the popular forms of orientation of the bodies is in the shape of spokes of a wheel, so that there's a central skeleton in the center, and then the heads emanate head then to foot, the foot going towards the outside from the center skeletal remains, as if it's spokes of a wheel. And this is actually a burial orientation that is found. It was found. It's since been excavated, and the skeletal remains are who knows where, which is the age-old story. But this burial pattern is actually repeated here in Aruba, and Aruba is pretty far away from the mounds that actually have this, such as in Alabama, West Virginia, Ohio, of course. So that, could be a connection. Another interesting thing is that in 2003, there were genealogists and other scientists who did an analysis of the mitochondrial DNA of the Aruban people to determine where their ancestry was. The reason why they chose Aruba is because Aruba was one of the few islands in the Caribbean that didn't bring over slaves from Africa, because the island is in a semi-arid climate and there's nothing that you can grow. So the Arubans were kind of insulated, especially the ones who never left Aruba. Their DNA is kind of intact. So after the analysis, it was determined that 70% of the Arubans had in them this archaic DNA. So this is the DNA of the giants. And so what probably happened, because in this same cave site I mentioned, there is one cave set aside, and it is what I believe to be a birthing chamber. There is a petroglyph of a woman, and she's wearing a veil, a shroud, essentially. And in her belly, they made little cup marks for her belly button. And through her belly button is a little baby in her belly. And on the wall are little are marks, are slashes. And the slashes can mean all sorts of things given the context. In this sense, I believe it's births. And so this would have been a birthing chamber. By the way, very strange supernatural paranormal things have happened in this birthing chamber as well, particularly I brought my daughter there. These strange lights showed up around her, and it was actually quite magical. It wasn't scary, but it was definitely intriguing. My daughter also happens to be Aruban, so that's actually
there we go.
interesting. So after seeing the slashes, you realize, wow, there weren't a lot of births. I don't even think there were a lot of giants, although they were the elite status individuals, clearly ruling over average statured humans who were around at the time. And we know that from burials where the two are mixed within the burial sites, that and also giving birth to babies with elongated skulls can't be easy. So you realize that there were not a lot of them. And I think at some point, particularly after contact with the Europeans, that they needed to mate with average statured humans and create now this mixed gene pool. And I think that's essentially what happened for their own survival. They began to just leave their little status, their little circle, and branch out to average statured humans.
Right. So you have DNA that shows up as being like an ancient form, like DNA, but there's nothing to compare it to, I guess.
Nothing, right. It
You
was
can't get
determined that
anything
there's
from bones or anything.
There's
Nothing's
well,
found.
the was determined that there's nothing even close to that DNA in existence. There's no modern DNA that matches the DNA. So it was assumed through deduction that it was this ancient archaic DNA from the archaic humans who lived here 5 to 7,000 or even greater years ago, which is quite interesting that the DNA is even still intact. But then again, people are still walking around with Neanderthal DNA
That's
and
true.
Denisovan DNA. So it makes sense that then this DNA would still be intact. It's very interesting.
Yeah, go ahead, Amelia.
I was going to say, to go just a couple of steps back, the umbilical cord, like in her belly button, that there's a baby and this is birth, makes a lot of sense, because birth, the baby's umbilical cord, is life, and it attaches to the mother. So just because I'm seeing some questions come through the chat room, that often when they were carving or leaving, these, well, carvings or paintings, whatever they were doing to communicate to the other world or to the generations to come that they left behind, that was how they told the story. It doesn't necessarily mean it's that, like a birth from this place, from the umbilical, like from the belly button.
I think it was just denoting that
Yeah.
she was pregnant, and that this was a baby inside of her. She also has, and I have pictures of it and when, later when I give out my contact information, you can see all the petroglyphs yourself. There's also a cut mark for her eye. So the mother's eye is made into a small cut mark, and then in her belly, where her belly button would be, is a cut mark as well. And then the
Yeah.
baby is behind there, which is quite interesting.
It sounds beautiful.
Yeah, it really isn't. It's as if it was done yesterday, because the site is so inaccessible that thankfully it's one of these places that hasn't been terrorized by vandals or trampled upon by tourists. And so it's really been preserved due to the fact of its location. And it's amazing that the giants knew this, and that's why they chose this very sacred space. And it would make sense that you would want births to be in a place that's very protective and far away from others to disrupt what was going on, particularly if there were so few births and these were the elite ruling class. They would probably want to have it be as protected as possible. So it really makes sense, the genius of it all. And in the middle actual cave is just petroglyph panels filled with petroglyphs. And there's no activity shown of eating or living or burning fires in those 3 caves. It's as if each cave had a distinct purpose and the purposes didn't overlap, which is also quite intriguing. And that cave system, I think, is one of the most sacred spaces of the giants throughout the Caribbean.
Right. It sounds like, it's like a high degree of intellect there and spirituality, which is far different than a lot of the myths that you hear, like, oh, they're cannibals. Like, I mean, that you hear that almost, like, seriously, like, I can't tell you how many times I've read about that, or I've heard other researchers say, oh no, they were said to be cannibals. And I keep saying, well, it sounds a lot like the whole Nephilim thing there, as a Nephilim idea. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that some giants probably did practice cannibalism. I think a lot of ancient cultures did have human sacrifice and did have cannibalism. I was recently in Belize in January, and that's the Maya, where towards the end, when they weren't getting water and the people were going crazy. I mean, I went in a cave system where they had found the remains of an infant child with the umbilical cord still attached. So they had sacrificed that child to the gods within the cave in hopes of rain or food or peace or war. So I mean, that is a common theme in ancient cultures. There's no evidence here of cannibalism. The archaeologists actually looked for that. And for example, in Chaco Canyon, there was cannibalism. And you can see where they were digging out the bone marrow, where there were cuts that weren't from animals. They were clearly cuts from sharp objects, even teeth, human teeth. And they also found the excrement, the like petrified excrement of the people of Chaco, and they found human remains within the excrement. So that's something archaeologically speaking you can determine, and it was determined that in Aruba, Bonaire, and Curaçao there was no cannibalism. I don't know, does that mean there wasn't any at all? We don't know. There could be something we just haven't discovered yet, and that could definitely throw a wrench in the theory. But as of now, there's allegedly been no cannibalism amongst the people here, and which is quite interesting because there's very little food source. Even at that time, Aruba was still a semi-arid place. However, the more you explore and look around, you realize there's so many things that you can actually eat. Seafood was a very big part of their diet. As a matter of fact, they took the shells and made mounds similar to the mounds that you find in North America. They're called shell middens. But after doing a research on the mounds made of shells, even in Florida in the U.S., I think that there was a more distinct purpose to the mounds. They have a shape to them. They have their positioning is very specific. They're not just by the seashore, which is why archaeologists think they're just piles of garbage. They are also next to burial sites. Some of them have flat tops on them, which is very hard to do with shells. So it's quite intriguing. Sadly, one shell midden has been completely destroyed. Some of the shells are even extinct, and I mean they don't even exist. The shells are fossils essentially. So I think that they weren't. If anyone could have had a reason to practice cannibalism, it might have been the giants here because they might have been running out of food. However, there's no evidence of that or of sacrifice at this time of humans. Now there are in the burials sometimes birds will be found in the burials, turtles. Turtle shells, bones, various bones from animals that some of them aren't even here anymore. And in two cases, actually three cases, two in Aruba and one in Bonaire so far, there have been remains of monkeys. Those burials were only of females. So it's interesting. The burials were only of females and the monkey was only with the females in each case. But the monkeys did receive an elite burial. So they received the same accoutrements, grave gifts, etc., as the females did within the burial.
Yeah. I also think maybe it would depend on the size. Like your islands, what was the average size? I mean, you hear stories anywhere of 7 feet to 15 plus feet. I imagine if you're on the higher scale of that, it's going to take a lot more food to sustain you as, let's say, a 7 foot. I mean, we've had giants in our own time that were, like 7 feet that are in the world record book, So what were your giants, height?
Well, the estimates are 7 to 8 feet, but what's interesting about the giants is that it's not just that they were tall, they were wide. They were exceedingly wide. They were very big people. Their bones were so thick, in fact, that when archaeologists in one of the reports used a traditional human cadaver saw to saw through the bone, the saws kept breaking. So they actually had to invent a specific saw to get through the bones. So these were massive people. They weren't just tall, they were wide, they were big, their bones were big, their heads were big. Their cranium was shaped differently and attached to the neck differently to accommodate a larger brain and a heavier brain case.
Like a Bigfoot type of stature? I'm not saying same individual. I'm just saying type of stature, just
Exactly.
big all the way around.
Big all the way
Right.
around, exactly.
Right.
Now, there are some reports in one of the archaeological reports that was published in 1980. It was reported that the giants were taller than 8 feet here. So what happens is when you get archaeological remains and you look at them, first of all, the bones shrink over time. And secondly, height is determined by a mathematical equation that the archaeologists came up with, not necessarily the measurements, but more of a hypotheses based off of what they've seen in the past. So there's a chance that they're wrong, and they admit that in some of the studies that these giants could have been bigger. For example, the largest skull that was found, and actually that was found in a cave in Curaçao, that's almost a foot long, the skull. So these were very large people. To accommodate a skull like that, you would need a very large body. Also, now that I'm here, I have people showing me instances of giant footprints. And it's weird because these footprints are in solid stone, and they're in diorite, or they're in basalt, or they're
How heavy are you?
Yeah, so
Right.
it's very interesting because you can see where the foot went in when it was soft, because you can see the displacement of the material around the toes. And when they pull the foot up, you can see where you would pull your foot up, and how it would pull along this kind of, I guess, liquid stone at that point, or whatever it was. Even if it was, because Aruba was originally a volcanic island, even if it were from lava, I mean, how do you step on lava?
Exactly.
It's bizarre. So there are megalithic sites here in Aruba, and some of the stones have markings that no one has any idea how they were done. And perhaps this is again following a theme that's found globally with megaliths, of what appears to be a melting of the stone, or some sort of manipulation of solid material to a point where you can mold it, however that might be. And so that's actually intriguing as well here.
I would believe that they had to be taller. I mean, most of the NBA is between 7 and 8 feet.
Right.
And I'm not trying to make light of it,
Oh,
because
that's
when you
true.
said 7 to 8 feet, I'm
There's some
like,
pretty big
I
guys,
watch
but they're just not
basketball, and there's a lot. I mean, Shaq is close to 8 feet. Like,
right.
so
Yeah.
I would think that they were probably much bigger, but with people around the world, different cultures have, like heights. Like, a lot of Italians are more on the shorter side than they are on the, sorry guys, but it's true, than they are on the taller side. And if they were, it's because their ancestors came from different parts of Europe or different parts of the world. And I think that, perhaps Arubans, when they came into contact, because they couldn't have been just the giants to know these stories and to see it, they must have appeared really massive to them.
Right.
But I would think that my personal feeling from what you're saying, I would believe that they were much bigger than that, especially with a foot-long skull.
Right, exactly.
I mean,
agree.
what's the diameter of that? An average adult head is between 20 inches and 23 inches, depending male or female.
Right.
What the heck is on a foot long?
And their elongation is interesting, because it doesn't go up like the elongation found in Paracas. It goes up and back.
So it's different than the Egyptian. Don't they have some that go up and back as well?
Exactly.
So they could have come from there.
That's exactly correct.
Okay. Thank you. I'm learning.
No, of course.
Okay.
No, because I've seen the Paracas skulls in Peru, and those skulls go straight up. I mean, they are your quintessential quote unquote cone heads. But this elongation is different in that it goes to the back, which is quite interesting.
Well, this is why I go back to the whole Bigfoot thing again. Hate to do it, but they have this kind of, cone sort of elongated.
Right, they actually do.
Too.
It's really interesting when you see that.
I know. Yeah.
And it's interesting because there is a cave here in a very remote area that has these petroglyphs that look to be almost like Bigfoot. And it's a very strange vibe in that cave. And the petroglyphs, one of them, they're very boxy beings. They're emanating up from the floor. So they show almost like they don't have movement, obviously, but they feel like they're moving and they're gliding up the wall of the cave. And one of them has its arm outstretched, like beckoning with long, long fingers. It's very, very, very strange. So it's interesting you mentioned that. And even weirder still, there was a gentleman here in Aruba who was trying to get into the Guinness Book of World Records by living in a cave for the longest period of time. He just came out, I think it was a year and a half or 2 years ago, I can't recall. And when he came out of the cave, he didn't actually make it into the Guinness book because of some technicalities, I'm not quite sure. But he has video footage of some strange creature that he said was terrorizing him every single night. And I actually have it on some of my social media, and it's this, like, in the back of the cave, you see it really quickly, and it's almost like a Bigfoot creature, except it's almost like a greenish color. It's very strange. So I often wonder,
Like the Grinch.
yeah, but
Green and furry. I don't know.
It's like a big, hairy thing. It's very strange, very ominous. So, I wonder if the petroglyphs have any connection to that creature, because all of them occur in caves. So that's quite interesting. Another, is there Bigfoot in the Caribbean? I don't know.
I would imagine that everywhere there's some sort of creature. I mean, we have Yeti, we have Sasquatch, Canada, Bigfoot. I think that's just common. Why wouldn't it be there? Maybe it's just more of a focus here, but the world is becoming smaller and we're learning so much more about it.
Oh, we're squeezing everything out too, so.
Yeah. So I just lost my time. I just want to say, Tamara, I hope you feel better. Thank you for joining us. One of our loyal listeners and friend isn't feeling well, so she had to leave. But hope you feel better soon, honey. I was going to ask, if someone had asked, and Michelle put it up, did they have the 6 digits, or were they 5 digits?
Yes, so there's no indication thus far of 6 fingers, 6 toes, or double rows of teeth, which is another thing that comes up sometimes with the giants. So there's so far no indication of that whatsoever. Simply that they had 5 fingers, 5 toes, and very large teeth. As a matter of fact, almost all the skeletal remains found were all found with teeth, full sets of teeth. And the teeth were shovel-shaped incisors, some worn down to the gum.
Out of a tooth?
I'm sorry?
I think you could can't you get DNA out of a tooth?
Yes. As a matter of fact, that was going to happen. And it's very strange, the story. So there are 2 skulls that were uncovered in 1970 at the cemetery that is here in Aruba, located in an area of the island called Malmuk. And in that cemetery, there were at least now since been documented 72 burials, but there are many, many more. The archaeologists just stopped digging. So there was a gentleman called Chris Angles, and he lived in Curaçao, and he was determined to prove that there were giants on these islands through the skeletal remains. And he actually published a report called The Quest for Giants. And in The Quest for Giants, he has 2 skulls that he extracted from the cemetery. And one of them has its hand fused to its face still, because a lot of the burials were, most of the burials were put in the fetal position with their heads resting on their hands. And some of them were in the supine position, which is very odd for that time period. It's very rare. And those were generally also the giants who had this special burial position. So he had the 2 skulls, and then he couldn't get any archaeologist to look at these skulls. He was so frustrated. He couldn't find any museum to house the skulls, so he created his own museum called the Curaçao Museum. It's still in existence. Sadly, it doesn't have the skulls. anymore due to a renovation, and the skulls are now
And the
missing.
Smithsonian got their hands on them?
Yeah, no, I've been looking for them for years, trying to get them to
Wow.
come back to Aruba, but I'm
Wow.
hitting a wall. But nonetheless, so he finally got the head of the Tropical Museum in Amsterdam to come and to look at his skulls. So she did analysis of the two skulls, and she determined that they were the largest skulls she had ever seen on Earth. And the hand that was fused was the largest hand that she had ever seen. She was able to publish her report, and it is in this archaeological report called The Quest for Giants. And she determined that what she wanted to do next was a carbon-14 dating. And at that point, this is 1970, they didn't really do DNA extraction, but she definitely wanted to do carbon-14 dating. So she was going to come back, but she hopped on a plane to go to South America, and her plane ended up crashing and she died. So that was the end of all the research on those skulls, and consequently all the research on the giant skulls. That was the last research done.
Can I ask a question?
Sure, of course.
How okay, we have Vikings that we know light bodies on fire and put them out to the ocean, and then they burn and they fall in.
Ceremonial burials,
How
yeah.
do we know that? We don't know for sure about the different races of giants. We just know there are giants here, there's giants found there. We don't really know anything about races or their culture. Do you think it's possible that they could have had a race that did their burials on the water, and we could have like skeletons just buried below like dinosaurs?
Well, there could,
What?
I think a lot of the archaeological history of Aruba is underwater. As a matter of fact, divers several years ago were diving, and they thought they saw a modern human skeleton, and it turned out to be an ancient skeletal remains. Now, with Aruba, there were mega tsunamis that hit these islands, Aruba, Curaçao, and Bonaire. I think it's very possible that a large part of the archaeology, particularly the archaic archaeology, is submerged. And it's just a matter of getting the resources. The water is very rough in the area where I've seen some footage of stones, and I know where the skeleton was found. And these stones appear to be cut. Some of them have 90-degree angles. And that area is very dangerous. There are sharks. It's down deep. So it would take a lot of effort to get down there. And that's just in Aruba. Now, in Bonaire, Bonaire has the largest cave system of the entire Caribbean. And out of its 400 caves, most are submerged due to the rising water. So that's another area where we don't know what's going on. Now, in Aruba and Bonaire and Curaçao, there was one other type of burial that they do believe was burning, because some of the bones did appear to be cremated. And then they were almost calcified. It was very strange, but it was determined that these bones had been over a fire. So there were the burials were either placed into the ground or in very elaborate burials under or over the shells of turtles, for example, as well as being potentially cremated. And I don't know if they purposely buried the bodies out to sea, or it was just due to cataclysmic events and water tables rising that those burials ended up under the sea. But yes, I think a large portion of the untapped knowledge is under the sea here.
Yeah, I thought so, because I'm like, it's not unthinkable. I love the Caribbean, and I go to the Caribbean, and I love snorkeling. So I am, I know about, there's so many things that are buried underwater. And I was just curious, because there must have been some kind of hierarchy and rank amongst them as well, as there is just with any tribe. There's a chief, and there's there's always someone.
You see, the North American culture, some of the chiefs were giants,
right? And also, from my analysis, I believe that this was a matriarchal society. So
Nice. Yeah.
that the female was in charge. And so we
As
know
it
that
should be.
I think it
Sorry,
was always
guys.
that way. I think it was the men
Sorry.
that changed it.
Did I say that out loud?
Some men changed it. We were always the boss. Like, come on, you
yeah,
give birth. Give me a break.
But they revered the goddess as well, right?
right.
It was
Yeah. But
Yes.
the
with a
umbilical cord that went down to the earth, right?
Yeah.
Through the
Right.
earth.
and,
They
and with a
understood.
hierarchy, like a chief or something, you might have a different burial for them because they were, a leader in the tribe. And maybe there was a different burial for, the other people in the tribe who were just followers and part of that tribe. But I'm sure everybody had a job.
Well, that cemetery that I mentioned here in Aruba, called the Malmuk Cemetery, actually does designate who was in charge, because the burials in that cemetery are in the form of isosceles triangles, with this a central, what the archaeologists, sometimes they think they're females, sometimes they think they're males. They don't know. I tend to think they're females at the angles of the triangles, and then other burials filling out the triangle. And so this happens repeatedly in this cemetery, but in the middle of the cemetery is a lone burial. And this burial is of the oldest, what's determined so far to be the oldest human that had died there. She's a female, and she was estimated to be about 44 years old or older, which at that time was quite old. And she has a hump back, which is actually very interesting. Could be just because of malnutrition. But it appears that if you had some sort of physical deformity, you were also given an elite status.
Crazy.
Which
Not
is
like today. Yeah.
Yeah,
What a
so
difference.
her burial was the most ornate. She had the most grave gifts. She had the most complex burials, where there was like a platform built under the ground, and then and then a large sea turtle shell, and then she was put on top of that, and then there were other stones, and then on top of her burial on the earth, there was a stone orientation of a circle of stones that were taken from a quarry that was actually a little bit far off. They were special stones. There were shells put in the center that were very rare shells. So she received the most complex burial, and she was all alone. And this could be that she was a shaman or a chiefess, or definitely someone of highest esteem. And other burial that has a human with, or a human, archaic human with a deformity, is one of a person who was a dwarf. So these skeletal remains of this little person were found, and the little person.
I was going to ask you about that, like dwarf, like I've read about that.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of times when you hear about the giants, you'll also hear about dwarfs, which is very strange.
Unless you're watching Game of Thrones,
and everything, maybe it's rooted in reality. So this little person had a very rich life. They lived a very long life. It appears that maybe they were carried around to facilitate their ability to live. They weren't malnourished, so they must have received, a lot of the best food. And as a matter of fact, there's a whole new archaeological arm that has branched out that is about determining how people in ancient times were treated who had some deformities. And it appears globally, this was something that went on in ancient times, that people who had these abnormalities, physical, what we would think were physical drawbacks today, were actually considered gifts from their gods. And so these people were treated almost as royalty, given obviously, if this little person lived full term, the full term of their lives, was not malnourished, had no other physical ailments other than their small size, then you can see that they were receiving the most food, the best care, and they were given an elite burial, which is quite interesting.
I'm not making fun. I'm 5'4", so I would have done well in those times.
I know. She's like, see, right here.
Like, carry me around, give me the best food.
Right?
So
carry me around and give me food.
5'4", no heels needed to wear. It would have just been great.
Exactly.
I would have lived really well.
in your opinion, do you feel this was all suppressed? Why was this all kept from us? Because I mean, this goes back to biblical times. This goes back to like ancient texts. This isn't a
exactly.
secret.
Right. I mean, at first, when I first started this process of research, I thought, why are they hiding it? Because really, it would mean that our species has devolved and not evolved, which is quite interesting. So some people say, oh, because of Darwin, because Darwinism. But if you read Darwin's reports, which I have, he talks about giants in Patagonia. He talks about the giants in what is now Argentina and how he saw them. He saw evidence of them, that they were super tall people. They were not of average stature. These were big people, that these giant people existed, and they existed
like a
on
population, like what do they call it? Population replacement, like what happened to Stonehenge builders who just like disappeared, and all of a sudden a whole new race of people appeared in that spot.
Yes.
Could it be something like along those lines?
I think, I don't think, in the case of the Caribbean, I don't think the giants ever disappeared. I think they just simply mated with average statured people. And that's
so
why
they mated themselves out of existence, essentially.
Exactly. That's what I think. That's what I think happened here.
Well, that's really interesting.
Yeah. So I think the reason why it's suppressed is because it could mean that some parts of the Bible are actually historical representations, particularly in the Old Testament. Maybe it is true that there were giants. Now, if you admit that there are giants, does that mean the Bible is real? Because that would be, of course, Christians believe and Jews believe the Old Testament is a valid document.
More so, I find.
But but then you think, wow, okay, so if you're admitting there are giants, that means that the stories told in the Old Testament were based on historical knowledge, and I think that could be part of it, in a strange way, that there's a concerted effort to deny the Bible and the realities in it. Maybe to take away power from certain groups, or
because I mean, even archaeologists like the Smithsonian, they all seem to be okay with giants up until like, what was it, the 20s or 30s? All of a sudden, no, we're going to dump all this in the ocean. We want nothing to do with it. Things are disappearing. Like, what caused this sort of a change to all of a sudden you're suppressing everything? Don't know. I know.
It's
That's
just
crazy.
Bizarre. I don't get it. I mean, for me, I would think, I said all the time, like, if I were going to school and the teacher told me, oh, tomorrow we're going to learn about the giants, I would be so excited. I would be like, wow, this is great. I can't wait to hear about it. And it would be so interesting. It would be invigorating for children to learn of it. And, even in Curaçao, I mean, this is a man who's since actually, he had a horrible story happen to him. So that's why they say that the giants are cursed. Chris Angles, who discovered those two skulls that are now missing, who had to create his own museum in Curaçao called the Curaçao Museum to house the skulls. He was standing on a street corner in Curaçao, and he got hit by a car and he was killed. So that was the end of his research into the giants. So it's always some sort of strange happening befalling these people who are researching the giants, which is actually quite odd as well.
Hey, I was just checking. I shouldn't do this.
I don't know. That's the one.
Sorry.
Oh, no. I don't know if it was deliberate. I often wonder about that with him, because he was a very outspoken character. I don't know, but it's strange that he, died under a violent death, essentially, as well as the former researcher did. Strange.
Yeah, I don't believe in coincidence, so I lean towards Sorry, Amelia, go ahead.
No. This is back to the NBA, because it was throwing me off. The average height, the 10 tallest NBA players are all above 7.5 inches tall, with the tallest being 7.7 inches right now. So who are we to say that there isn't some of this DNA in their blood hundreds and thousands of years ago? That's not normal. I mean, it's great if you're playing the NBA, but I'm saying it's not normal. All those Guinness Book of World Records, you're looking at all these really tall people. There's got to be some possibility that this is a gene that carried on from them somehow. Somewhere, somebody.
That's an intriguing concept.
Yeah.
It's just using them as an example.
I agree. Right. Yeah, because, whereas with the giants, it was common. Vespucci, even when he arrived on the island and he wrote his letters of when he first encountered the giants, he first saw the women. There were women who came to him, and they were so tall. He mentions if they were kneeling, they would still be taller than the men standing. He mentions that there were teenage daughters that one of the women had, and how they were double the size of these grown European men. And then when the 36 giant men came back to the camp to, thank goodness, thwart the plans of Vespucci, who were trying to kidnap the young women to take them back to Europe, these men, he said, were even larger, and what scared him the most were their giant weapons he had never seen before. The way they were constructed, he didn't even know how they were able to lift them. So I think with the giants, it was commonplace. They were all giants, and they probably looked at the average statured people like something was strange with them, or something was maybe wrong with them. And it's very intriguing. And then you have, since I've been in Aruba, I've talked to some local people who tell me, I have in my family, there are Arubans who say, we had an uncle we called the Giant, and he had giant hands, and it was, his whole body was of giant stature, his hands, his face, his neck, and they just go to explain how he was so tall he had to duck down to get into places. And this is a story I hear repeated by several local people, saying that they remember they had giants in their family. I got a message from someone the other day, from someone who's a Reuben, but in Holland, how they are the tallest. They're over 7 feet tall, and no one knows, and no one in their family is that tall. And he always was wondering, am I part of the giants, from Aruba? So I think it's
several generations, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's very strange. You don't know. And DNA is very complex. We still don't know as much as we think we know. And there's still such more to discover. So it's very possible that it keeps cropping up here and there.
There's a lot of small things, like 1% of the world has gray eyes. My father had gray eyes. It's only 1% of the world population. Other things like hair color. Red hair color is mostly, in the UK, where you find true redheads in Scotland. And why is that? So I don't see how it could. And no, I saw a comment. I'm not speaking conspiracy theory that they mismanaged. I'm speaking natural progression through evolution. That it's highly possible. Just like, why are some of us shorter than others? If you look back, there's little people in the family somewhere, and that gene just keeps going. Why is there a family who is average height, and then they have one child who's like 7 feet tall with these NBA players? Because there's a gene that skips and went to them. It happens. So I believe it's highly possible. I've never had that conversation with anyone who's come on to talk about it, just you, because I feel comfortable. I don't feel like I'm an idiot, but it's amazing to me. Well, our friend Bart is on. Bart is also a host on here on this network. Bart Sharp, hello. He says there is a theory that the Bigfoots that mysteriously appear come in and out of a type of shadow dimension to this reality. Are there any stories of mysterious appearances of giants in current times?
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting with the dimensions that he mentions that, because I haven't seen any giants or apparitions of giants. There's definitely things that go on with orbs here. There are megalithic remains, massive stones. The largest I've ever seen here in Aruba specifically, that clearly were built by the giants because they were so massive. And if you look on a global scale, you'll see these, wherever there are these megaliths, there are stories of these giants. But also you will see the petroglyphs. And the petroglyphs here are, there are some of them that the archaeologists told me were portals. So these portals could transport you to another part of the island, or they either go in or out. So they're either an exit or an entrance. So for example, there's this petroglyph at this one place called Io Rock Formation. And that is supposed to be a portal, and it's a drawing, and it looks this. It's a petroglyph that's found globally, which is another thing that's interesting. That a lot of the petroglyphs found here, that the designs are global representations that are found in very diverse places in Europe and South America, North America, even in Africa and Australia. And so the archaeologists told me that if you go by this one portal, it will take you to another set of petroglyphs. And
That's interesting for an archaeologist.
Exactly.
Yes.
So he tells me things and then, but won't say it in public. So, which is very frustrating, to say the least, and really counterproductive. So, for example, I was staying at an Airbnb one time before I moved here, right by the Io Rock Formation. And and he came over for dinner, and I said, I'm having like all these nightmares here. He said, oh, because you're right by Io, there's so many portals that open up, and we were right by the summer solstice. And he said,
like it's nothing. Oh,
right,
just
right.
here. Yeah.
He said that's why there's things coming in and out of the portals, and they're probably terrorizing you at night. So I thought, oh my gosh, I would never.
Power spots have those. Even I bet you the birthing area. I bet you.
Exactly.
Where animals go to die. Somebody mentioned that. William had asked about that. William Garrison somewhere. Sorry, guys, there's a lot of messages from 7 different platforms right now, but asked about stargates or portals.
Yeah, about 5 pages ago. Yeah, it's going. Yeah.
So definitely there are portals here. As a matter of fact, I had gotten a message from someone when I was still living in New York about he thinks he found a portal where he goes hiking, and there's so much. Aruba's a small island, but a lot of it is unexplored. It's very inaccessible. It's hidden through vegetation. So this, they said they went hiking, and all of a sudden the birds stopped chirping, the wind stopped blowing. And this is a common theme with these portals that you're going in and out of. And he was going to go check it out. And I said, maybe you shouldn't. And that was literally the last thing I ever heard from him. So I hope he's okay.
Wow.
It's kind of weird. But I think these portals are in existence, and it's possible maybe the giants even came through that. I mean, if you do believe in portals, and the portals, could have even been stronger back then.
Vibration and frequency, surrounded by water.
Right. Yeah. And there are a lot of fault lines here in Aruba. Aruba experiences earthquakes. And not, grave ones, thank goodness, but there are earthquakes here. I've experienced them myself. So whenever there's a fault line, and that's energy, you'll see strange things occurring. For example, in South Mountain, Phoenix, Arizona, in the U.S., there are fault lines that crack the rock. And by those fault lines, the native populations, the Hohokam, who have also disappeared off the face of the earth, they would do these strange petroglyphs of things that they saw, beings that they saw come out of these cracks. These cracks were manipulated during the days in front of and after celestial events such as solstices and equinoxes. So this is, again, something, fault lines and these petroglyphs and these solar events, or even supermoons, etc., Venus. I'm sure this conjunction that we're having with Jupiter and Venus is making a lot of energy. And so this is repeated all over the globe, and it's happening right here too. So you have to also ask yourself if these were all contemporaneous events of people drawing on the stones in Phoenix, Arizona, and people.
Well, they emulate what they see, right?
Right. But the same petroglyphs. I mean, that's another intriguing concept when I first came to Aruba is I saw the same spirals and the same patterns of designs that I had seen in Utah and New Mexico and
And
Arizona.
spirals, is that not portal?
Yes, so that's mostly what I can think is a
Vortex?
portal. I think
Yeah.
some of them mean some things, but I think in this case in Aruba, a
Mhm.
lot of them mean that they're portals.
Right.
And
Okay.
in Arizona, a friend who studies these portals, he told me that depending on which direction the spiral goes, will tell you if it's an exit or an entrance for a portal.
Okay.
Which is also quite interesting. And here in Aruba, you will see the spirals going one way, and you will
Right.
also see the spirals going another way.
So that would make sense, in or out.
Yeah. I mean, these people were all communicating somehow globally. How are they doing that? You know, it's just quite interesting. I mean, burials similar, petroglyphs similar, the people physically similar,
Yeah,
the
dimension.
building mounds. It's just it's very interesting, and I think they were communicating, and
Yeah.
how we don't know. I mean, clearly they were using boats. I don't think there's any question. There were two breakaway civilizations of the giants that were discovered by archaeologists. One is in Cuba, in a cave system in Cuba, and one is in a remote part of Colombia, in the middle of the jungle. And they determined that these were breakaway civilizations because of particular things they do during the burials and after the body has decayed. So, for example, the repetition of isosceles triangles was discovered in burials, as well as the spokes in a wheel burial type design. And also here in Aruba, the giant burials who had elongated skulls, their heads were covered with a red ochre. And they were painted, once they became a skeletal remains, the skull was painted with this red ochre. And the red ochre was from locally sourced manganese. So it's very possible that these burials were connected and these people were connected and these breakaway civilizations existed and they somehow did this through boats or maybe portals.
Yeah. Or aliens. We don't know really.
Never know.
Everybody's got their own theory. It's amazing. It makes you really think about the vast jungles and areas we don't have access to. It's kind of scary, but intriguing and exciting at the same time,
cave
right?
systems, right? Because those things go on. They're all over the world. They go on forever.
There's loads of caves in Italy. Nobody wants to climb them though.
I mean,
they're in the mountains.
Here,
yeah.
I drive by them. When I drive by them, I was like, oh, I want to get in those caves, but it's so dangerous, you know. And that the giants were so brilliant because they really did these burials and did these petroglyphs and created this scenario that you can't even get to it, and you're intimidated by it. As a matter of fact, the cave system that I mentioned, where there was the what I believe is a birthing chamber, I had tried for 5 years to get into that cave, and every time I went, there were killer bees. There are killer bees here, and there was a killer beehive where you could hear the humming from the ground before you even got up to the place where it was.
Bees. I didn't even think about that.
Up there, I was halfway there when I got to the closest point, and I noticed a 5-foot tall killer beehive. And I mean, that's, you know, you can't mess with killer bees, and you don't want to be climbing on a limestone mesa and then all of a sudden have a swarm of killer bees come at you. I mean, you could fall and die.
You get a flash rain and you're climbing on limestone, you go down fast. That stuff is like sponge.
It's very dangerous. I've done that climb 2 times and I don't envision doing it anymore.
No, that's scary. I think you have to be really, really, really experienced with limestone. Not even a climber, just limestone is porous. That's scary.
Yeah, and pointy too. And there are cacti all over, and there were poisonous spiders and large
Oh, you're a
called.
determined woman.
Yes, yes.
You
I
lost me
was.
at spiders. I was like, yeah, I'm good from the ground.
You have to just put yourself in a zone, because you
Yeah,
can't
see.
think of everything that can hurt you,
That's
and the
why I
fact
don't
that
tour the lands when I go to the islands. I go straight into the
Right.
ocean. I'm like,
Yes,
yeah,
yeah,
no, thank you.
There
yeah.
are
I wish I
things in
could
the
do that.
ocean,
I don't
just
know.
saying.
There's things in the ocean, but the tour guides are really good about where they take you. They usually take you to a coral reef. They don't really
No,
take
I'm
you
in
too
the
far. You
falls
have
of
to
everything,
you have
not
to
the ocean.
pay, yeah, you have to pay to dive to see something really
I love
interesting.
archaeology,
Right.
history,
Yeah.
architecture,
And I love
everything
the
it has to
ocean. I
offer.
love the ocean. I love
Yeah.
I love all of that,
Yes.
but I'm Pisces too, so that helps.
That makes sense.
It's my
So-
birthday month, yes.
Yay.
So do you believe that giants can exist today? Because I know there's a lot of soldiers from the Afghanistan wars that claim, now this is a claim, I don't know, I've never really researched it, but I figured, well, I have you on here, I would just ask. They've claimed that there are units that have just pretty much hunted them or come across them and have had battle with them. That they
Yeah.
claim to have killed some.
I mean, I've heard that. I don't know. I don't know much about those
Like
reports.
15 footers.
Right.
Ooh.
Huge.
I know. Like,
There are reports of giants still living underground, still living
Right.
in caves underground. I don't have any stories that I know of people, seeing giants now or them emerging now. But that would be very cool if they did. Or I don't know. Recently, Dennis Stone, who you've had on here,
oh yeah, he's wonderful.
America's Stonehenge. He has a print, a cast of a Bigfoot footprint from the Himalayas, and I've held it and looked at it. I mean, it's huge.
Wow.
So after seeing the size of that foot and comparing it to what the giants might be,
Yes.
I'm kind of okay with not seeing the giants.
I'm with you,
I mean,
Heather.
they're huge, just
Like, I'm good.
huge.
I'm good. I don't need it. I believe.
Yeah, so
it's-
I always wanted to see Bigfoot. I don't really want to see Bigfoot now either. It's too frightening to me. But
there's a lot of similarities, though, I find, aside from them being big and hairy. But there's a lot of similarities just in the stature and the mannerisms. But then you get into that whole how they can just disappear thing, the whole quantum aspect of all of that. But the fact that giants showed up on your islands just showed up. There's no real record as to where did they show up from before that, because there's just nothing before that.
Right. There's no history before the giants. So it was the giants and nothing before that is shown. As a matter of fact, it's interesting. The archaeologists used to separate the ceramic, more modern occupation of the islands by probably mainland Arawak, who came here, from the giants by calling them ceramic and pre-ceramic. So the giants were considered pre-ceramic because no ceramics had been found in giant locations, which I find it's not true. And some archaeological reports do show that ceramics were found amongst the giants. So I know for a fact that when I go to some of the sites where there were clearly burials, there are ceramics there. Now, were they just inhabited by later people? That could be. But the archaeologists did report that there were ceramics in some of these burials. So these delineations of, this time and then this time ended and then the next time started, it's so silly because everything kind of blended together and there was definitely overlap between the modern humans and the more average statured humans and then the large statured giants.
Mm-hmm. We have to do a quick station and sponsor ID.
Yes.
And then we'll be able to get back.
Then we'll be able to continue because this is really
I know.
interesting. And of course, just like yesterday, mouse doesn't work. It falls asleep. That's what it tells me. It's sleeping. You are listening to The Outer Realm with Michelle DeRoche and Amelia Pisano, coming to you live from the beautiful city of New Orleans I was going to say Ontario, on 107.7 FM and 105.3 FM. Tonight we are discussing we are with Heather L. Arnold tonight. It's been so exciting discussing her continued research and debut of her new Substack, The Island of the Giants, The Lost Race of the Giants of Aruba, Bonaire, and Curaçao. Stream or listen to our archives on the platform you normally use. Shout out and a thank you for today and always and from day one to Folgers Coffee. Thank you for fully sponsoring our show. Thank you for continuing to sponsor our show. We both love you very much and we thank you. We are so grateful for you. A shout out and a huge thank you for our intro and outro to Dr. Snick, the Sonic Surgeon, Justin Snicker, award-winning composer and musician. You can find his music on Amazon and Bandcamp and find him on Facebook and Instagram. Speaking of which, you know the drill. If you're on YouTube and you're on Facebook, don't forget to give us a like. And if you can, subscribe. And if those notifications drive you crazy, just turn them off. But why wouldn't you want to be notified when there's a new show, right?
Right. I know.
Right?
We're bringing the best people. Come on now.
Yeah, and don't forget, if you're just tuning in and you didn't know, we are now live on Roku.
There we go. There we go. Heather, what are your thoughts? Have you heard of the X lineage gene, which is believed to be, again, they can't trace the ancestry of, let's say, some indigenous people. They just can't go back, and they think that DNA may actually be that of giants.
Yeah, I mean, I know that, this DNA is not rooted in anything. The giant's DNA is not rooted in anything that the scientists know of. That there are some similarities with others, but it's very distinct. So I also had this archaeologist tell me that he thought that the giants were maybe manipulated by an outside non-human force.
Oh, sure. Like
an
aliens?
extraterrestrial interaction, which was, again, a total off-the-record conversation. He'll never say this out loud in front of people, which is so, again, frustrating. So I personally, I don't know that. I've researched it because I don't shut the door on any theories because we just don't know. And I don't believe to think that if we're alone in the entire universe is very, naive, particularly when there are multiple dimensions. So maybe there was some sort of injection of or of extraterrestrial DNA, or there was some speeding up process of certain genes, or some sort of robust nature was injected into the DNA of the giants to make them who they were. To me, that's very possible. I know that one thing that the giants all have in common globally is this idea of living in caves. Caves were very important to the giants. So caves also can be a connection to the underworld. And to think that, the giants were believed in the Caribbean to be born from the inside of the earth. So there is that connection, and do they all have that connection? It's quite interesting. The Nephilim were believed to have been banished to the inside of the earth, the underworld. It's a repeated theme, and that's what I kind of look for globally, are the themes that repeat amongst groups of ancient societies, cultures that are completely geographically distinct. It doesn't even seem viable that giants from Europe could interact with giants from North America, or giants from the Caribbean, or giants in South America, or the giants in Easter Island, which is another place I've been to that's right. Has theories, has legends of giants, who are the ones who built the Moai. So, it's hard for me to rule anything out, really, because we just don't know. And the more you research the giants, the more questions you have. It's just, you can never figure anything out because it's just so intriguing. And that's what makes it a really great topic. But it becomes obsessive. You can't stop thinking, working, researching, reading
You
about
can't get
the
DNA, right? It's all speculative. You can't get DNA
Right.
from them. Unfortunately, you find bones, you find teeth, you find skulls, you find all this stuff. You can't get DNA from it. If you're going to hypothesize, with alien intervention in the Anunnaki, if you're going to really go back there, that somewhere along the line when the RH negative bloodline got introduced, and you have to look at pockets of areas where maybe giants existed, like Sardinia,
Right.
big guys, big giants, 15 feet tall. But do you know that it's got the highest concentration of RH negative, like O negative, in the
Right.
entire world?
Right.
Like right there, that's the O negative. But I mean, you go places, like the Basque area, which is just RH negative in general. So I mean, if you're factoring in things like that, you could hypothetically say, well, okay, yeah, there's intervention because, but like RH negative didn't exist. We were brown haired, brown eyed people. And all of a
Right.
sudden, blue hair, yeah, blue hair, really elderly blue hair, zombie people. But,
Blue hair is
no,
very
but
popular right now.
yeah, green eyes, blue eyes, hazel eyes, blonde hair, red hair. Like this all stuff that sort of came into being maybe in the last 30, 40,000 years.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
I think until you're able to, extract some DNA from all those bones that they're hiding and the
Right.
teeth that they're hiding, which I truly believe the information is there. I just
Right.
don't think you're going to be allowed to access it.
Exactly. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's the most frustrating part, is that it's kind of like, I mean, these archaeological reports, I'll mention some of these to archaeologists, and they won't even know what report I'm talking about. I mean, they haven't even read. I mean, I have dissected these reports, every single page, every single measurement, every single diagram. I mean, just to the point where it's almost maniacal. I mean, it's just so much research, and there's such a trove of information in these archaeological reports that should be tapped into, should be revisited. I mean, the last major archaeological dig that uncovered giant skeletal remains, which is called the Bonaire skeleton, it was in Bonaire, was in 1980. So that was, and the conclusion of the archaeologists at the end of that paper is that Vespucci was indeed vindicated, that these people were giants. I mean, that's
Right.
a major, that's a published report that is, done by very famous archaeologists in the Caribbean, experienced investigators who determined that there were indeed giants. And yet this is like, that's it. Then you close the book, put it back on the shelf. It's like, wait.
That's pretty big though for archaeological academia. Like they don't usually fuss around with stuff like that. Like they're
Right.
very,
Yeah.
you don't want to be shunned amongst your peers. So the fact that you have somebody who actually went out on a limb and wrote a paper on it,
Right.
and even the
Yeah.
fact that you have archaeologists, off the record, speaking about half the things they're speaking to you about, I think is a real kudos to you, because normally they clamor right up about things like that.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think a lot of them, if they have a conscience, are, and any sort of light in their soul to really investigate, are intrigued by the giants, but they're so rigid and kept in a box, and how
Mm.
experts are this elite status, and they're not going to
But
get
those are the
funding
people
for
who are
this or
paying for
that.
them to work, though,
Exactly. So they
right?
are.
That's if you have
Right.
an independent who can,
Exactly.
fund their own research, you might get a whole other, outcome with that.
Right.
Unfortunately, it's sad, but I mean, it's common sense. We're not the first kick at the can. I mean,
Right.
they're finding out of place artifacts and things in old mines that are like 200 million, 300, 400 million years old, man. Like, you can
Exactly.
find other races of beings that have been here, You know, it's like Amelia was saying earlier, and you were saying earlier, there's so much that's underwater that proves
Right.
ancient civilizations that predate the ice age, that go on and on and on. Who knows? I mean, if giants were around, you're saying 7,000 years ago, I tend to think even through the ice age, if they're underground, they're not going to be affected by any of that. Who's to say they're not considerably older?
Right. And then there's the whole belief of Atlantis. So and
Sure.
Mu. So there's always I'm generally always asked this question, could they have been people who lived in Atlantis and were able to get out before Atlantis sunk, and and part of this population of people, Atlanteans, who scattered. Anything's possible.
The ancient Lemurians, same. I mean, you're right, all at the
Exactly.
bottom there. They could have easily
And
headed.
Aruba is part of the Antilles. So the Antilles are Aruba, Bonaire, Curaçao. The Europeans named these islands the Antilles because it's based off of Atlantis. They believed these islands were the remnants of Atlantis, and
Oh,
that's why they named these islands the Antilles, a name that still is in use today. I mean, it's when people address things to me, they write Netherland Antilles, Netherlands, because now we're under the rule of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. But
that's
so
fascinating.
the name Antilles is still in existence, and this is of Atlantis. So there's always that component. I mean, because that would make sense that there was this collective memory of petroglyphs, of mound building, which is essentially pyramid building. I mean, let's face it, but more primitive way. These burials were the same. This fascination with the solstices, the moons,
All of it.
the equinoxes. It's just it's almost as if they all scattered globally and took this knowledge wherever they were, and that's why there's this connection as well between all these groups of people that are geographically as disparate as could be. So it's another intriguing theory of the connection of these giants globally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you. Just carrying on with their traditions. There's too many traditions that are very similar throughout the entire world in any culture.
Right.
And when you go back into ancient times, you say, well, how do they make it here?
Right.
You
I mean,
know?
even the temples, I've been to India, I went to Madurai, and there are temples in Madurai that look like Tikal in Guatemala. I mean, it's just amazing. The same architecture. I mean, how is that possible? That the two very
How
far,
indeed.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And in the mounds, they're the mounds here, the shell, what the
Everywhere.
archaeologists consider garbage dumps. These are mounds. These are large mounds with a flat top. I mean, these are designed. They're not just, hey, I'm eating a shell. Let me throw it over here. And why are they always throwing them over in the same spot? Like, there's so many questions.
Had a dozen scallops. I'll just leave them here.
Exactly. And it's just bizarre. I mean, the shells were considered something holy and divine because
And pure.
these were used in burials. These were used as jewelry. They could have been used for commerce. So
The
there
shaman used to use them for healing.
exactly right. There was a magical element to the shells. These shells were considered revered. They didn't just need the food. They also incorporated the shells into their belief system. And to think that these are just garbage dumps is again delineating and degrading the intelligence of these ancient people. And it's time that we start looking at them as even, okay, they didn't have smartphones, but did they have other technologies that are far beyond our comprehension? I think the answer is yes. And I think to continue to minimize these ancient cultures is really a drawback of the expert class of archaeologists and anthropologists, because it's not allowing for the inclusion of the beliefs or the research in these other technologies that might have been in use, and metaphysical components, and spirituality that of a complex society. It's really just kind of dumbing them down. And it's, yeah, I don't think it's right. And I think it's a disservice to the entire modern human race that we don't do more research into the giants. It's frustrating, really.
I think there's a lot of answers in that DNA to illnesses nowadays.
Right.
You know, like
That could be too. Yes. And I'm sure there are teeth in these skulls that have DNA in them. I'm sure of it.
There's
probably
no
an
doubt.
enormous amount, because they most likely had a Paleolithic diet.
Right.
So there's got to be a ton of DNA in there, living high protein.
I think the research is starting, though. I think people are becoming open-minded about it. People realize that, there's so much information that's been kept from us as a populace with respects to, our ancestry and such. Because you see people now in a lot of shows. There's so many programs out there that are talking about even just the mounds and the giants and what's in them. And, archaeologists even have been, they still did this. So it's actually interesting how many people have come on the show even and who are, academic and are going, we know what they did. It's like, okay, so I think because of those similarities, even Dennis, he was talking a lot about the mounds on his property. Best thing about that is he owns the property.
Yes.
Right. So you have somebody who's very open-minded about exploration, and he's only explored a small part of that. So,
and the frustration comes in because we could do so much testing here. I mean, we could, testing underwater, and testing of the bones. I mean, there's so many levels more that we could do. I mean, in New York State, very close to where I lived, are ancient megalithic chambers, very similar to what Dennis has on his property. And we have been petitioning archaeologists, historians, anthropologists to come and research these sites and do testing to determine what
petition
exactly.
the Vatican. They've got them.
Yeah, well, and, yeah,
he was like, not going there. I'm going there.
No.
But they will not acknowledge these sites as being ancient. It's just so frustrating. There's no way. I mean, okay, some of them probably are modern or replicas, but for the most part, because if you've seen enough of these chambers, you know which ones are modern, which ones are replicas, and which ones clearly are ancient. And an archaeologist could easily determine that, and they could do a small dig. But I don't understand the reluctance. And, a lot of archaeologists, sadly, they don't even do exploration anymore.
It's funding, right? Isn't it, Heather?
Costs a lot of funding.
Right.
So you need somebody behind you to pay for that.
Yes. I mean, but even if they did some sort of a round to raise their own money and do it themselves, or, branch out and do that independently, I just think it would be a tremendous service to the human story. And it's just very frustrating because, then you'll get these samples, but then you can't find any place to test the samples. No one wants to test the samples.
Or they disappear. I think samples were sent out to be tested back in the day, and you just never saw them again. There's stories of that everywhere.
Constantly. And I hear about it even, I met someone here in Aruba, a local person who has tons of artifacts. I mean, artifacts that would blow your mind. And it's just, I didn't take any photos or anything because I want to be respectful. And
it's a private collection.
What he has,
to protect them.
It's insane. You can't even believe it. It's almost like out of this world type stuff that you can't believe, clearly from sites where there were giants. And and he said, if I give this to the archaeology museum, they're going to put it in a box. So for example, I've been to the basement of the archaeology museum here, and it's so much stuff in the museum that no one has access to, no one can see. And I had a friend here who was doing a hike and found a giant tool, a huge giant tool that was part of either something to break open shells or an axe or something very large, placed and left exactly where it had been left maybe 5,000 years ago, if not more.
Wow.
So I said to him, why don't you put it, take a picture where it is and everything, and then bring it to the archaeology museum, show them where you got it. And he did bring them to the archaeology museum, and the archaeologist said, oh, thank you, and put it in a shoebox, close the shoebox, and put it on a shelf. And every time I go to the museum, I want to see is that stone tool there, and it's not. And the thing is, there's only one pre-ceramic, as they call it, or archaic tool on display in the museum. It's huge. It's bigger than any other tools there. And there's only one. And it's a whole period of time of thousands of years that there were people, these giants were in existence. It's frustrating because it would be intriguing. Aruba is dependent on tourism. So wouldn't tourists want to come see the giants and the giant remains and the giant tools?
That would be great because there's not much of a nightlife there. So that would be great.
Yeah, I think it would be, educational, be interesting. All ages would want to see this.
Or sending those artifacts on tour would bring more funds into Aruba. Yeah,
even something of that nature. I mean, there's so many wonderful things that could be explored by doing further research, putting these things on display, and then educating, the population about our history and how it's very complex. And it's not, first it was Paleolithic, then it was, it's not just, it doesn't just work that way. And
no, there was something before paleo.
There's a big something,
didn't come from the air.
Something in between that nobody's talking about.
Story, and for some reason, the experts don't want to tell it. And it's sad because I see a lot of the archaeologists, they're just busy writing papers. They want to be published, and I get that, but there comes a point where you got to get back to that Indiana Jones style. You got to go back to really doing the research, and sadly, I think a lot of people aren't doing it.
No, you're right.
I wonder if we take it down a conspiracy theorist point of view. I'm not a theorist, but if we take it down their point of view,
let me get my tinfoil hat. I own one.
Tinfoil hat. I want a witch's hat, though. They may take it. They may look at this and say, well, maybe the government is and has been doing research, and maybe this civilization still exists underground, and they know about it. It could be why there isn't funding and why it keeps getting stopped and why there isn't continued education and research out there.
That's another possibility as well, actually.
Yeah.
And that's something people bring up often, that there could be research going on that we're unaware of.
Absolutely.
I don't know how they would keep that secret, but I would think someone would spill the beans just because humans are humans, but it's very possible.
I'm sure people have. Well, I'm sure people have leaked things. Just nobody believed them. That's the problem. We're in a different time now. We're in a different time now. I think people are more open to listening and understanding and believing. I think we're different. Yeah.
And I hope that they, I hope that funding starts coming through, and that there is a concerted effort to research this. At least, I have all these archaeological reports where they were mentioning that these people were giants, and then all of a sudden, that's it. It just stops. It's bizarre.
Let me read this to you. This is very kind. Hi, Kenny. Hi, Kenny Blackburn. He says, "Wow, such a detailed, well-told adventure, Heather. You are very interesting to listen to. Thank you so much for sharing tonight. It's topics like this is why I listen to this great podcast." Thank you, Kenny.
We
love you too. And he took the words out of my mouth. You were very incredibly forthcoming and open, and thank you.
And you have something that you are looking that you're starting, a new venture that you are talking about. So we're nearing the top of the hour. Now's the time where you tell everybody what you are doing, what's new, what you have coming up.
Oh, thank you. Yes, and thank you, Kenny, for your kind words. I'm glad you're enjoying it, and I appreciate it. I am launching a Substack. It's free to join. You just have to give me your email in the Substack. Go to heatherlarnold.substack.com. The email is just to be notified of when I'm publishing. I'm publishing in a blog form because I think people respond better to small snippets of information. A lot of people, I mean, eventually I'll write everything in the book, but I'm taking excerpts from my book and will be publishing them on Substack, and most of them will be free. Some of them will be subscription articles, but a majority of it will be free, just simply because I want to share as much information with the public as possible. Also, you can find me on Facebook, Heather L. Arnold, and I'm Heather L. Arnold on Instagram and on Twitter as well. And I'm very active on social media. So if you put your email in the Substack, then you'll be notified when I publish the first article. The first article will be mostly about the beginning stages of the giants, when the giants were first discovered, why the giants were called the islands of the giants, as well as the story of a femur that was sent to the Vatican that was never received. So I'll just give you the groundwork of the giants and then delve further into the archaeological reports, the physical remains, their traditions and their megaliths, etc.
I've got something for you. The giants of Sardinia, which is one of the highest centenarian populations of the world, so you know they lived a long time, are probably under the Vatican right now.
Right. Yes.
The catacombs.
That's a good point.
The caves.
That's a good point. You're right. Yes. Yeah. The Vatican has a hand in this too, I'm sure.
Yeah,
sure
they go up
do.
for communion with Pope Francis.
But thank you so much for joining us tonight. It was so informative. It was a lot of fun. It was really delightful to have you on. And I hope you had a great time. There was like lots of people listening this evening. And I've got all of your links set up in the show description. So
thank you.
There's over 200 different podcast sites for archives. So it's going to be, they should be. The descriptions are all there and they're all the same.
Great. Thank you. Such an honor and a pleasure to be on here. Thank you so much. And I love girl power. So
that's right. Absolutely.
Well, we'll have to do it again.
Important.
Let us see when your book is out.
Yes, definitely. I would love to come back. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you. And I'm so jealous you're in Aruba. Thank you.
Yeah, come visit. I'm here.
I would love to.
Yes, anytime. Let me know.
Okay. We'll go snorkeling and diving.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I'll be in touch.
Thank you. Good. Thank you so much.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.
Well, we have come to the end, of course, of another fantastic segment. That was just like amazing. Just so informative. Wow. That was great. I learned a thing or two. I love learning along with everybody else. And man, I learned a lot. So got to go to Aruba, Bubbles. You'll be in the water. I'm going to be looking for giants.
I'd be in the water looking for the giants under there because that's my theory, right? So
okay.
I'll use
I got
that.
A top. You get underwater.
I'll use the diving excuse to get down there. Imagine the things you find underwater, though. It's stunning. I miss that.
Yeah, I feel the same. It's for me, it's just a matter of, I don't know. I can't just sit there and
no, diving's not sitting. Diving is exploring underwater. Diving's not sitting on the beach. It's not the beach. I love to dive, but it's complicated when you travel because you can't get on a plane or you can die. So there's a lot of rules.
Yeah, for sure. There would be for sure. I'm just, I don't know. I'm
You've got red hair. You shouldn't be in the water. You shouldn't be in the water with red hair, though. Okay, Joe, we're still on air.
And we're still live, and here's Joe's joining us. So anyway, another awesome segment. Thank you so much to Heather for joining us. Big thank you to Folgers Coffee. Big thank you to Dr. Snick, Steve McGinnis. Thank you. Next week, guys, we're bringing on Susie Hansen. And you guys are going to really love her. She's basically handles, I guess it's sort of the, I guess you could say it's sort of the New Zealand MUFON. And she's a founding director of UFO Focus New Zealand Research Network. And she's a contactee and experiencer. She deals with a lot of contactees and experiencers. and she does a lot of UFO research and has been there for 48 years.
Wow.
Yep, you heard me. So she's going to
Her
be
whole
coming
life.
on Wednesday night.
Yeah.
And on Thursday night, we have Mary Joyce. Now, Mary Joyce just wrote a book called Spy in the Sky. And she's going to talk about secrets and cover-ups that she's discovered using Google Earth.
Oh,
And
yeah.
she's found like a boatload of stuff.
Big thing right now.
I know. So, put your seatbelts on and join us next week. In the meantime, we're bracing here for a snowstorm. Hope you guys are all like Heather and just sitting in the sun somewhere. If not, you should be. And have a great weekend. We shall see you all next week. Night.